Hi, and welcome to That Cancer Conversation, the podcast from Cancer Research UK that brings together the science and the stories behind cancer, with me, Sophie Wedekind. For the last episode of this season, I'm joined by a very special guest. She's been a journalist for nearly 2 decades, covering some of the biggest stories about the British royal family. Katie Nicholl is a journalist, broadcaster, and a New York Times best-selling author. She also had her own experience of cancer, finishing treatment before breaking the news on His Royal Highness King Charles III and the Princess of Wales's cancer diagnoses. Katie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's really, really lovely to be here and very exciting to be a part of this.
Well, so you've been a journalist on the British royal family for 2 decades. How did you get into that?
God, you've just aged me massively, haven't you?
Sorry.
Yes. The truth is I actually always wanted to be a journalist. Since I was about 11 or 12, and I remember being asked in class, what do you want to be? And I just knew I love people. I love telling stories. I love listening to people's stories. I grew up in an age of watching Kate Adie reporting from the front line. And I actually initially wanted to be a war correspondent and have sort of ended up in the front line in a very different capacity in the job that I went on to do. So I did my training with the Daily Telegraph, and then I went over to the Mail on Sunday, where I really sort of honed my skills as a journalist, first as a show business correspondent. I had a wonderful job covering celebrity life in all its different guises, sort of meeting all the big stars at a time when I think the showbiz industry was at its very best, with really big, amazing stars. I'd go off and do the Cannes Film Festival. I'd go and do the Oscars. And then my royal reporting actually happened very much by accident. I was at a showbiz party at the Kensington Roof Gardens, and I'd gone out for a breath of fresh air. This time they had flamingos outside by the roof garden terrace, and I'd gone out to sort of see the flamingos and have some fresh air, and turned around and Prince Harry was standing in the doorway of one of the private rooms and invited me into his party. And of course I wasn't going to turn that invitation down, and that sort of led into this secondary career, I suppose, of reporting on the royals, because he sort of gave me this window into royal life. And he at the time was about to do his A-levels and was just about to sort of enter that exciting phase of his life, with all of his partying and his military career. And so I ended up by accident falling into covering the royals, but it has led to an extraordinary career of 15, 16 years now, where I've covered everything from royal weddings to royal births to, more recently, royal funerals, a coronation. I've travelled the world with the royal family. It's been an extraordinary and incredible career, and one that I feel very honoured and very privileged to have done.
You've almost seen a lot of their life events unfold and being next to them, really, and reporting that.
Very much so. And particularly with Princes William and Harry, when I sort of first started reporting on them, I was in my early 20s. They were their late teens. And I feel very much I sort of have watched them grow up, watched them evolve, travelled to Africa with them. One of the most amazing trips was going away with both of them and seeing Harry really showing off his work in Lesotho, that amazing work that he did with Centre Bali, and watching them ride on horseback through the African mountains, and really doing some amazing things with them. And then, watching them grow into young men, into soldiers, Harry on the front line, their relationships, charting the incredible romance of William and Kate from St Andrews through to that amazing wedding day. So it's been eclectic and varied and fascinating. And, the whole time that I've sort of done my print career, which is where I was formally trained as a print journalist, other subsidiary careers have sort of grown out of that. So my broadcasting career, I've started working with Good Morning America for ABC when I first started reporting on the royal wedding. I now work with NBC America, and of course the books I've written. I think it's 5 books now, one of which was a New York Times bestseller. So I sort of have seen my career as multi-layered, but the royals have always been at the heart of it.
Do you find when you write about the royals, do you feel still very connected to them in a personal sense when you write about them, or is there still a separation?
I think there's always a separation. I think there has to be, between us and them. I think you can never let yourself get too close or attached to a subject, because you have to be objective in the role that you do as a journalist. I think it's really, really important. Although saying that, I have felt quite personally connected with them in the past year or so, as they have gone through their own cancer journeys at pretty much at the same time as I did. So there is that sort of more personal connection, which I know we're going to talk about in the podcast.
Yeah, so I guess my next question is, could you tell us a little bit about your cancer experience and if what your diagnosis was like? Did you notice any signs or symptoms?
Well, it was the end of 2022, which had been a phenomenally busy and extraordinary year. As a royal correspondent at the time, I was making a podcast myself for Vanity Fair called Dynasty, which is all about the royal family. I'd been writing a book called The New Royals, which was the last book that I had published. I was doing a coffee table book as well. It'd been a very, very busy year, and then in the September, of course, the Queen died. And, as much as I think we were all anticipating that moment, when it came, it was still something of a shock. I was signed up with the BBC to cover the event with them. It was 10 days of sort of official national mourning. And I think when people actually stop and think back to that moment, I think everyone will remember where they were when they heard the news that the Queen died. And it was extraordinary. I don't think you had to be a monarchist to appreciate that this was a seismic event, one that you would always remember in your lifetime, because the Queen has been there, or had been there, for most of us for our entire lives, whether it was on the stamps that we put on our letters, on the coins with which we paid for our things, or in our living rooms every Christmas Day, when most people around the country would sort of tune in to hear the Queen's Christmas Day speech. So that it was a momentous occasion. I remember feeling probably more nervous about that broadcast than I have in any other situation. It just felt like such a responsibility to be conveying the mood of the nation, not just to everyone watching in Britain, but the billion audience around the world. So I tried to forget about all the cameras that were trained on me, put together all of those near 2 decades of royal corresponding, writing, all of the knowledge, and try and condense it into something that was meaningful for people. So it was a huge responsibility. And I remember getting to the end of the year and just feeling actually really, really overwhelmed. And I was with some girlfriends, some of my oldest friends, and one of them has said, you don't seem yourself. Perhaps you should go and get yourself checked out at the GP. And I'd been having sort of very minor heart palpitations. And some chest pain. I mean, the only way I can describe it was that I just felt like I couldn't get enough breath into my lungs. And I've always been into yoga and breath work, and I've always used it as a way of grounding myself, particularly at times of stress. And I just couldn't do it. So I went to see my GP. And he actually thought I was on the brink of a burnout. He was like, I recognize you from TV. I know you've had a very busy time. I sort of turned up having just done a 5K run. I was still in my workout gear. And he was like, you're obviously fit, but, we can put you through the paces. And if you think it's your heart, let's get that checked out. So the first thing was to do all of the blood tests, which all came back as normal with no elevated tumour markings. So for me, cancer wasn't even on the radar at that point. I thought I was having some sort of a heart attack or something, or a burnout. I was sent to the Royal Free Hospital for a CT scan on my heart and an ECG, all of which came back as completely normal. And at that point, I remember being discharged from the clinic, and the cardiologist's words stuck in my head so clearly. He said to me, Katie, don't forget that stress is a killer. It's a very real thing. And I remember looking around in that waiting room and being struck by the number of women in my age group that were in that cardiology department. It wasn't older people that you might associate with heart issues. It was younger people. And his words really stuck with me. And at that moment, I said to him, would you consider giving me another scan, please? Because my father had a hereditary condition, which was an aneurysm in his aorta. And I'd been told before my 50th, I ought to get it checked out. And I thought, while I'm here, let's just tick that off the list, get a clean bill of health. And I almost didn't turn up for that scan because I thought, well, everything's fine. And thank goodness I did, because it was during that scan of my abdomen that they discovered a lesion on my liver, which ended up being a very aggressive cancerous tumor. It's called a cholangiocarcinoma. It was a cancer of the bile duct. It's a primary liver cancer. Most people assume that a liver cancer is a secondary cancer. It's gone from one part of the body into the liver. And this is it's a lesser known cancer. It's a very, very aggressive cancer with an abysmal survival rate, because more often than not, this type of cancer is not found until it's too late. So those heart palpitations that I was telling you about that I was experiencing were we think, because the tumor was quite large and my liver was pushing on my other organs and causing those heart palpitations, and certainly causing that sense of indigestion. But these are symptoms that most people might just ignore, might just think is down to stress. And, I'll manage it however I'm going to manage it. So I'm incredibly grateful and indebted to my GP for listening to me. I'm forever grateful to myself and my intuition, because that was what was telling me that something wasn't right.
It's definitely an incredible jump going from thinking of stress symptoms to a cancer diagnosis. How did you feel? How did you, cope with that almost?
Well, I mean, I was just completely floored and shocked. I was 46 at the time, 2 young children, my daughter Matilda and my son George, now 12 and 7. I was a busy working mum. I suppose, like many women, I've always invested in my health. I've always kept fit. I've always eaten well. I've always been very mindful of my health. It's always been very important to me. But I think, like many busy working mums, I probably sort of was always worrying about everyone else and not about myself. And, had got to the point where actually my body is almost like my heart was sort of knocking on the door saying, wake up, something's not right here. Don't just ignore this. But I think it's very difficult to articulate the shock of a cancer diagnosis. You just think, well, how can it possibly be cancer? To be honest, I think, had I been diagnosed with a breast cancer or perhaps some sort of a gynecological cancer, I wouldn't have been entirely surprised. There is a history of breast cancer in my family. I had gone through the best part of 10 years of IVF with my ex-husband to have our children. That had led to me having regular scans on my ovaries, just out of caution. I always had regular mammograms because of my mother's history. That wouldn't have surprised me so much, but a cancer that I'd never even heard of and could barely pronounce in my liver, I mean, I was devastated, and I was floored, and I was shocked, and I was frightened. I was terrified.
Yeah. And then, you went through treatment. What was that like for you?
Well, I must say that I had the most extraordinary experience with the NHS. So I got my cancer diagnosis on the 14th of February. So not the best Valentine's Day gift I could have hoped for by any means. I was actually out of London. I was in Suffolk at the time with my children and my parents on a half-term holiday. And, the journalist in me was like, okay, well, first we need to find out what this is. Then we need to research it. Then I need a second opinion. And they were like, you need to come into the hospital in London to the Royal Free tomorrow. We're seeing you immediately. There's no time to waste on this. And within 10 days, I was in the Royal Free being operated on by the magnificent and wonderful Dr. Dora Pisanu, who is a liver resection specialist. I underwent 11 hours of surgery. I had nearly half of my liver removed. To be perfectly honest, there wasn't actually really even time for me to think about it. It's like I had cancer for 10 days. It was just bizarre. One day I had it. I had nearly 10 days to get my head around it, and then it had been taken out of me. My surgeon, who is incredible, explained to me the procedure. She explained how I was going to be cut open. So I actually have a scar that runs from my sternum down to my belly button. Often they have to go across as well. They didn't have to do that on me, which I was very pleased about, because I was able to preserve my abdominal muscles, which I'd worked very hard to get. But I remember waking up in the intensive care unit. I spent 2 days there, and just still trying to get my head around the enormity of what I'd gone through. The recovery was tough. I was at the Royal Free for 2 weeks. I actually moved. So my operation was all done on the NHS. I just want to make that really clear. They swung into action with such speed and such urgency, and they saved my life. That is what they did. I then was able to go up to the private rooms. I was very lucky to be able to do that, and I spent 12 days up there, getting well enough to go home. I mean, I had children to get back to, and a home to run. So the recovery was quite long, and it was quite hard. I mean, I remember one of my team coming in and sitting on the end of my bed, and he is like, Katie, it's going to be a good 4 to 5 months before you're really back to yourself, back in the gym. And I was like, no. And I remember and as soon as I was able to get out of the bed and walk, I'd go around the ward, and I'd go and meet people and chat to the nurses. And then I'd go out of the hospital and with my father get to the Hampstead Heath. And each day I'd find another tree to get further to. And then I'd get to the lake or to the pond. And each day was a goal. And when I got home, I used to run this 5 kilometers through the woods. I'd sort of set myself a benchmark each day. And each day I got stronger and stronger and stronger. And within 10 weeks of that operation, I was back on television. I was reporting on the coronation of King Charles. By that point, I was on chemo. I was on a form of tablet form chemotherapy called capecitabine, which is used for this type of cancer because this has a high recurrence rate. So this was a belts and braces operation. Even though they knew they'd successfully removed my tumour, all my lymph nodes were clear and I had clear margins. I was very, very lucky. They didn't want to take any chances. So I went on this course of preventative chemotherapy, the same as the Princess of Wales. And I tolerated it incredibly well. I didn't have any nausea. I didn't lose my hair. I was tired. I was fatigued, but I made sure I rested in the day. I suffered terribly from that syndrome where you get very sore hands and very sore feet, and my feet and hands were blistered and they'd crack. I couldn't do the washing up. I couldn't hang out the children's laundry. I mean, there were days when I actually couldn't walk on my feet. So it literally grounded me, which I think was probably my body's way of being forced to stop and to heal. But thankfully I was well enough to do the coronation. It was really important for me to do that. I'd sort of set myself this goal that, I really wanted to be able to do that. I think in many ways when you go through a cancer diagnosis and you become a patient, there is a sense that you lose some of your identity. And it was really important to me that I still felt like myself, like Katie. And my work has always been a huge part of my identity. And so I was really grateful to have that goal, and even more grateful to my incredible body and spirit that I got to that point where I could go and present for NBC and cover a really momentous moment. And then after that, I did retreat very quietly and take some much needed time to heal physically, to heal emotionally, and to go on a journey that I, very much a spiritual journey for me, post cancer, because it is a life-changing moment and it's a wake-up call.
Absolutely. I think, people approach how they heal differently. What does life after cancer look like for them? Some will focus on work and that being back to normal. Mm-hmm. Other people are saying, well, I just need to feel like my body is mine again, and, working out those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Going back to work for you after a cancer diagnosis, did you let people know, or was that still very much private for you?
At the time, it was still very private. I was still, it was just such a huge shock for me, for my family. I didn't tell my children at that point. Obviously, I had to tell them I was going into hospital because I was in for a long time. And I didn't know how I was going to respond to the medication. And so I needed to tell them. So I explained to them that, I'd had something in my liver that wasn't working properly. So I wasn't lying. I just wasn't giving them the two scariest words that they could possibly hear at such a young age. I mean, even at my age, it was terrifying to hear the words cancer, cholangiocarcinoma, chemotherapy. I didn't want to put that on them. They were little happy children going to school, and I wanted to keep their routines and their lives as ordinary as possible. And so I knew if I went public, they're aware of what's online. They know what I do. I'm often in the news or on the news or, on Instagram, whatever. It would have been very hard to keep it. And I just wasn't ready myself to share that. I really felt a sense of needing to come to terms with it myself. So I did the very bare minimal when it came to work. Don't forget, I'd done those 2 books. I'd had that busy year. I think I was entitled to a little bit of time off.
Absolutely.
And no better excuse to have some time off than to heal. And I think you're right. I think people do that in many ways. Some people will just want to get back to work. That gives them structure. It gives them routine. It gives them distraction. And I did seek that to a degree in my work. But I also knew that this was a life-changing event. This was going to change me. And I remember when I left the morning of the operation, looking in the mirror in my lobby and saying to myself in my head, you will come back a different person from this. And I did in many aspects of my life. I did. And I knew that this was more than just the cancer. This was a wake-up call. This was a pivotal moment in my life to really pay attention to. And I think anyone that's gone through a cancer diagnosis, I think many people are able to relate to that it is just that. It's a disease. Something is not sitting in your body well. And, I really needed to address that. So I went through many different journeys. I mean, one of the first things I did was to go and have all the genetic testing, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't carry a rare or defective gene. That if I needed further treatment, I wanted to be able to identify the gene of the tumor, of the cancer. Because of my family history of cancer, I wanted to make sure I didn't carry the BRCA gene. So I did all of that. And then I went through, once I'd completed the Western medicine and the chemotherapy, I went on a very holistic journey. I did a lot of healing. I did a lot of reflexology, meditation, mindfulness. I went and found an incredible energy healer. One of the things I did do as a journalist was to research. I always believe that knowledge is power. It can be a very frightening thing to do. And I think cancer can be a very lonely experience, particularly with something like cholangiocarcinoma that most people have never even heard of. And I did go on some of the Facebook support groups. I found those really quite upsetting because the stories were sad. People were losing their lives. They were losing their fights. I found that very difficult while I was going through treatment, and I was going through such a period of uncertainty. But I found great comfort and refuge in the AMMF charity, which is the Alan Mormont Foundation. It's run by a wonderful woman called Helen Mormont. It's the only cholangiocarcinoma charity in the UK. Because it's such a rare, or we don't say rare, we say lesser known disease. It's actually more common, we're realising now through the research, than ever before. And I got involved with this charity. They published a white paper into the work that they do. I worked with my former colleagues at the Mail on Sunday. We put that out as a really important health story. It led me to the House of Commons a few weeks ago, where I went and addressed a reception about the importance of raising awareness about lesser known cancers. So my whole cancer journey has taken me on a very different trajectory.
And I think, mentioning the holistic side of your recovery, I think a lot of people see cancer still maybe as primarily a physical disease, but actually it does affect people mentally as well. And there is a mental recovery that comes along with it.
There is, and there was very much for me. I did go into therapy because I felt that I needed that support. And once I told my children, which was only recently when I went public with my campaign, and the AMMF launched a Faces of Cholangiocarcinoma campaign, which I did with several other survivors, including the designer Zandra Rhodes. We were on the Lorraine show. We did an amazing media campaign, had this event at the House of Commons. So in the process of telling my children, I also knew it was a lot for them to take on. So we've been working with a counsellor with them as well. But we have very honest and open conversations about it at home. I mean, bizarrely, within a year of my own cancer diagnosis, both my father and my mother were also diagnosed with cancer. My mother's breast cancer came back as a secondary breast cancer, and my father's prostate cancer, which was at the time sort of very, very low and being managed, suddenly flared up. So as a family, we went through a huge amount. And I'm now very open with my children about it. And I think in the whole cancer conversation, what I wanted to enable for my children was to take away some of the fear. I think the narrative around cancer is changing. People don't see it as a death sentence, because it's not always a death sentence. There is so much research, which you are pioneering, incredible research, incredible treatments. The survival rates are going up all the time. Diagnosis is going up because we're more aware, we're being scanned more regularly, we're learning more about this disease, but survival rates are also going up. And I think that's such an important message to get out there, and one that I very much impress upon my children. And to sort of bring this back to the royals, I think the work that the Princess of Wales and the King are doing around smashing stigmas, because I think there are still stigmas that need to be broken down around cancer. They're doing incredible work, and they're shining the spotlight on, life-saving work and research. And, no one would wish this on anyone, but, I'm planning to write a book about my journey, my cancer journey, my life journey. And in many ways, it actually has been a blessing, because it helped me to turn my life around in a way that I don't think I would have done had I not got diagnosed with cancer. So I think there can be many positives, and, there is always light at the end of the tunnel.
So, there is that powerful incentive to listen to your body, trust when something's not right.
Yes.
You said, I just had that feeling.
I did. I just had that feeling that something just wasn't right. I mean, not in my wildest dreams or nightmares did I imagine I had a tumour the size of, my palm on my liver, and with a cancer, the name of which I'd never even heard of. But I did have a sense that something wasn't right. And I think we're busy. We're all busy. We all live busy lives. I mean, at one point I bought a bottle of Gaviscon because I was like, well, it's just indigestion. But it wasn't going. And I have always been very intuitive about my body. I've always listened to my body. I've always been very grateful to my body for all the amazing things that it's been able to do. And it's gone through a lot. It's gone through 10 years of IVF, quite a few miscarriages, 2 pregnancies, and I've always listened to my body. I've always been in tune with it. And I just had a sense, and it was very strange when I was going for that secondary scan of my abdomen. It was in the new year, after I'd been signed off by the cardiology department and told, you have a clean bill of health, but stress is a killer, take note. And I remember walking down thinking, gosh, I feel like I'm wasting someone's time here, and maybe someone else should have had that scan. The NHS is under huge pressure. I don't want to waste resources. And I almost thought maybe I should cancel and let someone else take it. And thank goodness I didn't, because it was an incidental finding. It was only through scanning my aorta that the radiologist, who, was incredibly thorough, just thought she'd do a little dance over my organs and stopped. And it was just that moment where she's like, the aorta's fine. And I was like, brilliant. And I'm literally getting up off the bed and doing up my shirt. And she's like, but I'm really sorry. I've seen something I don't like the look of on your liver. And, of course the worst goes through your mind. It does. And when you're waiting I had to then be referred for an MRI after that. And anyone that's on a 2-week cancer pathway, anyone that's waiting for scan results knows that it is absolutely the worst time. And, I definitely had to draw deep on resources then. I found journaling really helpful. I found meditation really helpful. I found prayer really helpful. I mean, I'm not actually particularly religious, But I definitely learned to become spiritual in all of this. I was absolutely aware of something greater than me from which I could draw comfort. And I absolutely did, because when you're in that situation, you really need to draw on your resources, and staying anchored and staying grounded is so important. Being supported is so important. You know, my family, my friends, were everything. And you know, you need that support network. So use your friends, use your family, talk, don't hold it in. And if you feel that something isn't right, something's been playing on your mind, if you found a little lump or a bump or a mole's changed, or there's a niggle that you've just not been able to put your finger on, go and get it sorted out.
Well, exactly. And even, you know, you said your friends were the ones to tell you, saying something's not right, there's something off.
Yeah.
You know, that recognition from
someone else. Listen to it.
Yeah.
Listen to someone else. Or, you know, your gut is always your best instinct. It's always been my compass. It's always guided me right and wrong and where to go in life. And there was just that niggling feeling.
And I think, you know, that there is that important point that we are very conscious of our NHS. You know, we love our NHS.
Yes.
And we understand that they are under pressure.
Under huge pressure. And, you know, I appreciate not everyone has private health insurance. I was very lucky to be able to go and recover in my own room. But actually I was also taking the pressure off. So someone else that didn't have private insurance, who couldn't afford it, was able to go and, you know, have a bed on a ward. But, you know, the Royal Free were absolutely fantastic for me. I don't know of many cases where you're operated on within 10 days. 10 days of a diagnosis. And I think that's the whole point. You know, if you can be treated early, then you have a really good chance of surviving.
Absolutely. And also, you know, that thought of, well, should I give that to someone else? And actually, I think you'd ask anybody who works in the NHS and they say, if something's wrong, get it checked out. It's, you know,
absolutely,
just focus on yourself and what feels right for you, what is right for you.
Yes, absolutely.
And when it feels off, go get it checked out.
And if anyone listening to this podcast is suffering from any symptoms, itchy skin, yellowing skin, any sense of abdominal pain or tightness in the chest, that sense of indigestion, if you're going to go and see your GP, and frankly you should if these are symptoms that have been going on, you know, just say, could I have a blood test? Could you check my liver function? Prompt your GP if you have any concerns. Really do, you know, you have a voice. This is your health, it's your body. You have that power. I think you can sometimes feel very powerless and very out of control in all of this, but never forget, you know, the power of you and the power of your voice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, having open conversations, that's the thing. It takes the fear out of the word, that when we don't talk about it, we don't share with the community. We don't feel connected with each other in a sense. And, you know, you were talking about the isolation you felt having a lesser known cancer.
Yeah.
Did you feel like there was that community aspect helped a lot?
It really, really helped. And I've met some incredible people. I mean, the founder of the charity, Helen, is just an incredible woman, who will stop at nothing to get this disease recognised. And I think there is a sense that you know, liver cancer is an old person's cancer, or, you know, only alcoholics or people with cirrhosis and liver damage get it. That's not the case. The white papers and the findings of the AMMF's research is that actually this cancer is more common than we realise, particularly within young people in their 40s and 50s. Now, we don't know why. More research needs to be done, but we do know our livers are under huge amounts of pressure. You know, and I've learned a lot about the liver. I mean, it is the only organ apart from our skin that can regenerate. It is remarkable. I mean, from losing half, mine is now apparently so big, according to my wonderful Dr. Dora Pisano, that it's pushing on my pancreas. I have this beautiful big liver, which I've regrown. It's an incredible organ. But this sort of misconception that liver cancer is an old person's disease. It isn't. You know, it's also, it's not widely known about, but actually a simple blood test that GPs can do can test for cholangiocarcinoma, and it costs pennies. I've met many incredible people through this charity, including Andrea Sheardown, who has raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for the charity. Now, when she was eventually diagnosed, she had a tumour the size of a small pineapple on her liver, but it had taken her numerous attempts to try and be seen, until I think she sat down on the floor of A&E and refused to leave until she was scanned. It shouldn't get to that point. And the problem is with this cancer is if it goes too far, it's more often than not incurable and inoperable. And that's why the survival rates are so low. If we can detect this cancer earlier, if GPs are more aware of it and those symptoms, whether that's itchy skin, the slight yellowing of your skin or your eyes, which is, of course, a sign of jaundice because the liver is not functioning, or in my case, that unexplained indigestion or abdominal problems. It's often passed off as IBS and you're sent home with paracetamol. I've had so many people write in on Instagram saying, okay, I've had this sense, I've had this. Thanks to you, I'm going to push for a scan. I think it's all about raising awareness. But to your point about the importance of a community, I think it is hugely important because you can feel very alone and very frightened by a diagnosis like this. And I've sought great comfort and have made some amazing friendships through the charity. So I'm very, very grateful to it. I'm very proud to be an ambassador for them.
And, you mentioned that you went through that almost shift of being quite private about your diagnosis to speaking at the House of Commons.
Yes.
It's a big shift.
It was a big shift, and it was, I speak for a living. It's what I do. I never stuck the words, but it was not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy sitting and talking about it. It can be very challenging at times, but I feel that it was important for me to do it. I have a profile as a journalist. I have a voice. I have a platform, and if I can inspire one person, or if I can convince one GP who read one of my many pieces, perhaps we'll just test that person. If I can help to save one life, then it's absolutely worth it, because it is very much about raising awareness. It's hugely important to me.
Reporting King Charles's cancer diagnosis and then followed by the Princess of Wales' cancer diagnosis. How did you feel having almost two worlds collide for you?
It was an extraordinary moment. At the time of the King's cancer diagnosis, I just finished my own course of chemotherapy, and I was back at work by that point, and I was working for NBC. I'm a freelancer. I work for BBC. I work for Sky, and I remember very clearly there's a sense of alarm, a sense of panic, that sort of look of concern, and oh my God, but it's cancer. And I was able to look down that barrel or look that person in the face and say, yes. And people are surviving cancer all the time. If it's been found early, there is absolutely every chance that it is treatable, that he'll be able to live with it, that he will be able to continue doing the brilliant job that he is doing as king. And that is exactly what he's doing. I think he is living proof to anyone going through this journey that when it can be managed, when it can be treated, even if it can't be cured, you can still live a wonderful life. My mother's doing just that. I think the Princess of Wales's diagnosis really floored me. Of course, we knew she'd gone in for major abdominal surgery. We didn't know what it was for, but I felt such compassion for her. I don't often cry on the job. I mean, you have to have a thick skin, but I found that really moving, really hard, because I could relate to what she was going through. I mean, I had also been in hospital for the best part of 2 weeks. I didn't have my children come and see me because I didn't want them to see me with tubes and everything else. They only came when all the tubes were out and I could get out of bed and be mummy, right? Because that's who I am. And so I could really empathize with her and what she went through. And I think what she's doing now and how she has spread such a message of hope and positivity, I think is absolutely incredible. And I think she's very, very brave and is doing some really important and commendable work.
And both are doing a lot of work in the cancer space and raising awareness, like you've mentioned. And the King held a reception back in May.
Yes.
Talking about how it was a frightening experience for him.
Yes. I think it was rare to hear the King speak in such personal terms. And I think, one of my friends commented that she'd never seen the King look more real or relatable as he did when he went to do that visit to the cancer centre, the first visit that he did when he came back to work. And that resonated with me, and I think with a lot of people. Cancer doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care about the colour of your skin. It doesn't care whether you're a royal or not. It's totally arbitrary. And I think in many ways it's been a great leveller for the royal family. It's enabled them to connect with ordinary people in a very special and unique way. And I think, the reception that the King and the Queen hosted was an important moment for cancer charities, for research groups, for the voluntary sector, organisations like Maggie's, who I visited earlier this week to give a check, having run the half marathon for them. It's about what you were saying. It's about that sense of community. It's so that people don't feel alone, so that they feel supported. I mean, cancer affects 1 in 2 of us now. I don't think many people know. I don't think it's a case that for many people there isn't someone within their family or their friendship group or their work environment that hasn't been affected by cancer. So I think to have 2 such key figures, that the King and the Princess of Wales, have had their own personal encounter with this disease and now be working within that space and that public forum is incredibly powerful.
And having 2 individuals from essentially different generations as well, where, you have the King, who's of an older generation, and I think a lot of people still see cancer as primarily an elderly disease, which it is, but there are a lot of young people, a lot of under 50s who do get cancer.
There are, and I was one of them, and the Princess of Wales has been one of them, and these cases are on the rise. Is it the pollution in the environment? Is it the food that we're eating? Is it the ultra processed foods? Is it that we're all living far more stressful lives these days? I think I think there is inevitably an environmental factor in all of it, and a lifestyle factor in all of it. But, I remember when I said to my oncologist, why am I hearing about this? I mean, within my own friendship circle, I had 4 close friends diagnosed with cancers, one of whom, Katie Phillips, we lost last year. I ran the Hackney Half Marathon in her memory. She had a very rare form of throat cancer with a sort of rare and rogue gene that couldn't be treated. But you just think, why are so many young people getting cancer? And that's why, Cancer Research UK and the work it's doing is just absolutely crucial, because it feels like something of a pandemic. It feels like something that is not going away, and that we need to get on top of. And I think, we do have to be positive about it. There are breakthroughs all the time.
And there's a lot of questions still around it, and a lot of things we don't know. And that is, that's the point of research and funding research, is to answer those questions, get the best minds in the labs and ask and try and answer those questions, so that more knowledge is power, like you said. everybody gets the access to that information.
It is power, and I know it can be very frightening. And honestly, I did go to many dark places because the stats are the stats. But you have to remember that you are individual, you are totally unique. Every cell in your body is different, and it's yours. So I tried not to get too bogged down by the statistics. I saw myself as me, as powerful, as unique, and as able to overcome this. And that has always been my mental attitude and my approach.
A royal family that is being open about their health, has that always been the case for a British royal family?
It hasn't always been the case. And when you think back to Queen Elizabeth II, we were never given commentary on her health. We were always told it's a private matter. Sometimes we might be told if she didn't turn up at an engagement, or that knee wasn't great and those steps would have been difficult for her, and we'd get a bit of a briefing from the palace. But actually, until she died and her death certificate was produced, we didn't know the cause of death. So no, the royal family they've always been very private about their health. But I think we have seen a shift with the king. I think that's largely down to wanting to break down stigmas, wanting to raise awareness, and wanting to connect with people. I mean, that's a huge part of what the royals need to be able to do. And, a lot of people say, well, why hasn't he been open about what type of cancer? Why hasn't Kate told us what type of cancer? Well, I think, for two reasons, really. One is, I think some things have to stay personal and private. Yes, they're public figures, but they're not completely available for public consumption. Everyone has the right to retain privacy around their medical condition. But also, every type of cancer deserves equal recognition, funding, investment, and research.
I think back to the reception and seeing all the people in that room with the king there and Queen Camilla as well. There's so many people who get affected by it, almost 1 in 2.
Yes.
And you don't want to isolate anyone. That's not the point of raising awareness. It's about bringing people together. And the more people that can feel hope within this disease, the better.
I really believe that. And I remember one of the medical team I spoke to, he said, never, ever in all of this, never give up hope. He said, you have every reason to believe that you're going to survive this. It's operable. We then found out it hadn't spread, responded to the chemo. But I know I'm not out of it yet. I've got to get through the next 5 years of scans, and I will be scanned for the rest of my life. But, I think hope is absolutely vital. I think having a positive mental attitude is so conducive to healing. I mean, I was absolutely determined, even knowing the stats, absolutely determined that I'm going to be here. I have to be here. I'm going to see my children grow up. I'm still young, and I have no idea why I got that cancer. I will never know. But I am determined to do everything I can to ensure it never comes back. And being hopeful, being positive, living my best life, exercising, eating well, being grateful, being in the moment, all of these things that I've learned on this journey are part of that. And I think keep me well, keep me healthy, keep me happy. I mean, I was fascinated to read just recently about the study into exercise that was part funded by Cancer Research UK. We all know how important exercise is, but to have a study suggested very strongly that exercise can help prevent cancer come back and prevent tumours from returning in patients who have had cancer and been treated is remarkable. And, I have made a real investment in my health. I've always been fit and active, but I think it's hugely important. We know all the benefits of exercise, that it's anti-inflammatory, that it releases all the happy hormones. It's good for us. And I think there's a lot that we we can do.
And in terms of, the royals and spreading awareness in this space, what do you think is the future of how they might get involved more?
Well, they are patrons of numerous cancer charities. They work close. I mean, the Queen does wonderful work for the Maggie's Centres. The King is patron of Cancer Research UK. I think by convening these charities, organisations, research groups, the science of it all, they have convening power. That's what we see the royals do best, and they have incredible soft political power, so they can make these issues that become national conversations. They don't lobby, but they have great influence. So I think to have them as part of this very important conversation, to have a personal vested interest in it, to be able to speak about it from the heart. You hear the King speaking from the heart I think it's fantastic.
And in terms of, the awareness we're seeing at the moment, the impact we're seeing at the moment on a public scale, what's your opinion of that? Like, how have you viewed it as a royal correspondent, seeing after that announcement of the cancer diagnosis from both the King and the Princess of Wales? What's been the shift like for you?
Well, I think it's been a case of raising awareness, of having more honest, open conversations, and conversations that have been started by incredible people, like Dame Deborah, who just did such amazing work, who was, defiant to the last and spread a message of hope right until the very end. And I think it sometimes takes public figures to do that, but it's so powerful because it gives hope to so many. I mean, I've been really overwhelmed and deeply moved by many of the messages that I've received on my social media channels from people saying, thank you for going out there and speaking about cholangiocarcinoma. Thank you for putting it on the map, because we don't feel heard. No one's ever heard of this disease. GPs haven't heard of it. No one seems to know about any treatments. No one seems to know about any centres of excellence. Well, the truth is, there are treatments. There are not many centres of excellence for cholangiocarcinoma, but there are some. And it's about getting the information out there. I think, social media plays an amazing role in many ways. It can be toxic and dangerous and damaging and awful in many guises, but it can also be phenomenal in many ways. And it has connected me with some amazing people who have been able to refer to some of these centres of excellence, to refer to surgeons. My surgeon, Dr. Dora Pisanu, has so many people come to her who've been told it's inoperable, there's nothing we can do. My friend Andrea was told there was nothing they could do. She probably had 6 or 8 weeks. She was to go home and tell her children, get her finances order, and basically prepare to die. And she wasn't prepared to do that. She had rebellious hope. She is an incredible person. She found a centre, and the tumour they were able to remove it. And, 10 years on, she's here campaigning, lobbying, and I intend to do exactly the same.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for coming on, sharing your story.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And we've loved having you on.
Oh, thank you. And, just think the work that you're doing, the research that you're doing, you've got royal patronage, you've got so many people behind you, but it's amazing work, and we're very grateful for all that you do.
Katie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That Cancer Conversation. You can find more episodes on our channel, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any cancer questions you'd like us to explore for future episodes, let us know in the comments or email podcast@cancer.org.uk.